Ever since Marvel kicked off the MCU back in 2008, DC has been incapable of shedding their reputation as the little brother. But I think after seeing Superman last night, I can finally and safely say that those days are over. What is going on, everybody, and welcome to my review for Superman. This is the official kickoff to the James Gunn led DCU, and along with Sinners was my most anticipated movie of the year, and there are a multitude of reasons for that. Number one, I'm just a massive comic book fan. The two pillars of my childhood were superheroes and Star Wars, and I have continued to enjoy both of those things into my adult years. And growing up, I was always a DC over Marvel kid. I just enjoyed their characters and stories a lot more in comparison to Marvel. I loved coloring them in coloring books, and the cartoons I would be watching were mostly DC cartoons. But needless to say, over the last couple of decades, Marvel has pretty much dominated the space in the conversation, especially when it comes to their movies. The MCU is the most successful film franchise of all time, and DC really has not been able to match Marvel's level in that regard. During the MCU's prime, the only thing that we were getting out of DC that was receiving universal acclaim was the Dark Knight trilogy. But of course, since Marvel had a very successful universe franchise happening, DC felt the need to counteract that. It makes a ton of sense. And why wouldn't they be able to do that? They have a very robust roster of characters to work with. They have their Justice League to Marvel's Avengers. It was a no-brainer to go down that road. But it got off to a bit of a shaky start with the release of Man of Steel. That was a very split down the middle movie. You have a lot of people that hated it and a lot of people that loved it. The people that love it care a lot about that movie, and we will get into that a little bit later. But then from there, we got Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, which I think is a pretty solid Batman movie, but the Superman elements are pretty weak. And then from there, we got the first Wonder Woman movie, which I think a lot of people would consider that to be a pretty good superhero movie. And then after that was Aquaman, which was a massive box office hit. I don't think it's that special of a movie, but a success nonetheless. And then we got the Justice League, which is a major focal point of contention when it comes to the DCEU, and really is a marking and a culmination of all of the issues that universe faced. The originally released Justice League, directed by Joss Whedon, who replaced Zack Snyder, is my pick for the most disappointing and really one of the worst comic book movies that I have ever seen. It is an absolute disaster of a movie that I couldn't even really comprehend as I was watching it. That's how bad I thought it was. And there was obviously a lot of controversy that was going on behind the scenes with that movie. WB had kicked out Zack Snyder from the director's chair, and they were blaming it on a very serious family tragedy that he was dealing with at the time. And they completely mishandled that situation and left a sour taste in a lot of people's mouths. They brought in Joss Whedon to direct it, which is why the movie is referred to as the Justice League. And he was the director of the first Avengers, and so they thought he would be a good fit for Justice League, and he absolutely butchered Zack Snyder's cut of the movie, so much so that a release the Snyder Cut movement would start and would actually prove to be successful when years later Warner Brothers actually released the Snyder Cut of Justice League that gave him money to finish his vision for the movie. And that was actually probably the biggest success from a fan reaction standpoint that the DCEU ever saw. But it was too late. They had already come out with that Justice League, and then the Wonder Woman sequel fell flat on its face. The Flash was a very big PR nightmare, and a lot of people cannot stand that movie. I was actually a fan of The Flash, but I can completely understand why it didn't land with a lot of people. And then eventually we would go on to Aquaman 2, which would mark the death of the DCEU, and that movie just got put out to die because it was already made. The James Gunn DCU had already been announced, and that put the final nail in the coffin and was the end of this very turbulent, polarizing disaster of a film franchise. When it was announced that James Gunn would be the man in charge for this rebooted DC universe, I was absolutely thrilled. I'm a massive fan of his, both in the comic book movie genre and out, and he has already given us a few really good comic book movies already. Of course, he's got the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy within the MCU, which is a marvelous set of movies, but he also has the Suicide Squad that he made in the brief stint that he was fired from Marvel, which is kind of a sequel slash reboot to the first Suicide Squad, which I actually forgot to mention when I was running through the DCEU because it's just such an awful movie that I try not to think about it as much as I possibly can. But nonetheless, even though I was super excited for him, there are a lot of people that do not feel that way. James Gunn comes with his own baggage and criticizers, but you also have a lot of people that still feel very scorned by Warner Brothers' handling of the DCEU, and specifically their handling of the director of Man of Steel and Batman v Superman, Zack Snyder. Zack Snyder is a very unique filmmaker. He's got his own distinct style and vision, and you know a movie of his when you see one. And because of that, he has been able to develop a very devout and loyal fan base. Some people would go as far as to describe them as being a bit of a cult, and there is a sector of that fan base slash cult that is full of people who are chronically online that have taken every opportunity that they can to bash both this movie and James Gunn himself. And look, I can understand the people that are still just disappointed with how the DCEU played out, because I'm one of them. I liked the Man of Steel movie. I liked Henry Cavill as Superman, and I think Warner Brothers' treatment of both Zack Snyder and Henry Cavill was absolutely unacceptable. But we cannot allow these characters and movies to just die with the DCEU. We have to be able to allow new filmmakers and creative visions to forge a path forward. And so I cannot understand the links that some of these Snyder bros have went to try to sabotage this movie. And now you add on top of that this movie is now becoming the topic of a culture war, because of course, what doesn't these days? And it has made what should be a very exciting build up to a film release kind of exhausted, and my patience has worn thin, and I have just been brutally waiting for this movie to come out already so that we can quit talking about all this outside noise and just focus on the movie itself. Which brings us to where we are here now. The movie is finally out. I saw it last night, and I am very happy and relieved to report that I absolutely loved this movie. I wish that I could go back in time to 2011 and find little 14-year-old me coming out of the theater having just seen Ryan Reynolds' Green Lantern, feeling just as low as a DC fanboy could possibly feel, and tell him that brighter days are ahead, because this movie is those brighter days. And all of the confidence that I had in James Gunn going in was fully confirmed once the credits for this movie rolled, and I cannot wait to see what he does with this universe moving forward. But before I get into what I liked and disliked about this movie, and trust me, there's not a lot that I disliked, please consider giving the video a like and subscribing to the channel as well. I would love to have you here. Make sure to get down in the comments below and tell me all your thoughts on Superman and what your excitement level is for this movie and the universe moving forward. I would love to read what you guys have to say. Now let's get into the review. As always, starting with the positives, and the first thing I want to talk about here is David Cornsweet as Superman. Now, with all due respect to the late great Christopher Reeves and Henry Cavill, this was easily my all-time favorite portrayal of the character. Now, even though I did grow up a massive DC fan, it was never because of Superman. He was never my favorite hero because he's just so much more powerful than all of his peers and counterparts. He's just not a character that I ever had an easy time connecting with up until now. This is a version of Superman that actually feels vulnerable, and that's not a side to the character that I am typically accustomed to seeing all that much. And the power gap between him and his peers and his foes doesn't feel to be as large as it typically is. And so those around him, like the Justice Gang, are able to shine a bit more on their own without feeling like they're being overshadowed by him. And the enemies he's facing actually feel formidable, and he's not just steamrolling them. He actually takes his fair share of losses throughout the movie. And all that with the portrayal from David Cornsweet, with his presence and performance, it feels a lot more heartfelt and endearing than that of a Henry Cavill's. And there's much more of a focus on Superman as a hero on not just a large but a small scale here with actually saving people. That's why the meme exists of Man of Steel Superman not saving people, because you don't see that a whole lot in that movie. And not to keep comparing this to Man of Steel, but that's a film that made me a fan of a Superman movie. movie. This is a film that made me a fan of Superman, and it's all accredited to the performance from David Corenswet and the directions that James Gunn is taking this character, and I cannot wait to see where they both go with it moving forward. If this is going to be the Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man of the DC universe, I think we are in very good hands, and I am excited to see what the future holds for this Superman. The rest of the cast and the chemistry amongst them is phenomenal as well. I don't think that this movie has a single miscast character from top billing to bottom. I think for a lot of people, on a pure performance standpoint, their biggest standout will be Nicholas Hoult as Lex Luthor. He just gives an awesome portrayal as this character. Some may find him a bit whiny or envious, but to me, those are just the things that fuel the rage of the character and make him the absolutely evil, villainous mastermind that he is. And this movie is willing to take him to certain lengths that I don't think a lot of other comic book movies would have the balls to do so. But after him, you also get Rachel Brosnahan as Lois Lane, and I think her connection with David Corenswet's Superman was on full display. The chemistry between them is off the charts, which is what you definitely need from those two characters. And then you have the Justice Gang with Nathan Fillion as Guy Gardner, and he is just fantastic comedic relief, glorious bowl cut and all. He is joined by Isabella Merced as Hot Girl, who doesn't get a lot to do in this movie, but what little she does get, she does enough to show how well she fits that character, and she is someone I am excited to see more of moving forward. And also joining them is Eddie Gathegi as Mr. Terrific, who was by far for me the biggest standout of the movie. He was an absolute scene stealer. I enjoyed every single second we got with him. I wasn't that familiar with the Mr. Terrific character going in, but walking out, he's now going to be probably one of my favorite characters in the entire DC universe. Who would have thought that coming out of Twilight, one day him and Robert Pattinson would be making such great contributions to DC projects, but here we are. I absolutely loved him in this movie. I thought he was phenomenal. You also get really solid contributions from the likes of Anthony Carrigan, Skylar Gisondo, Frank Grillo, Sarah Sampaio. It was just one of the most well-rounded, overall rock-solid casts in a movie that I've seen in quite some time. Everything else nice I have to say about this movie is strictly a credit to James Gunn as a director and leader of this movie. Him and comic book movies are just like peanut butter and jelly. They are a classic combo, and he just does not miss when it comes to making these types of films. Being that he is such a comic book nerd, he has such an appreciation for the smaller characters and the finer details, and he has shown that time and time again in all of his comic book movie projects. He has the ability to take these characters like the Guardians of the Galaxy, like certain members of the Suicide Squad that you have never heard of or do not care about, and make them some of your favorite characters in an entire franchise. And I think once again, he does it here in Superman. You will go into this movie probably not knowing who Guy Gardner is, probably not knowing Mr. Terrific. Maybe you know Hot Girl, but you don't know anything about her outside of her look, and he will make you care about these characters. I don't know if there's another director other than James Gunn that could have made Crypto work in a movie like this, but because he knows how to make a comic book film, he is able to bring all of these things together seamlessly and make them fit perfectly. And I know I'm just going to sound like I'm glazing James Gunn this whole video, but the ability to take things that shouldn't work and make them work really is the genius of him. You could rip his name off the poster and still tell while you're watching this movie that the person that made this deeply cares and understands the source material, because this is definitely the most comic booky of comic book movies I have ever seen. This completely changes the definition of what it means to be a comic book movie. I know by default we just call all superhero films comic book movies, but this is strictly out of the pages of a comic book, ripped from the TV cartoons that you used to watch when you were a kid growing up. There is some wacky and zany ideas going on in this movie, and I don't think anybody but him could make it work as well as James Gunn does. Some other things I think this movie does really well. Visually, I think the special effects were top tier. There was never anything that caught my eye in terms of looking bad. The music here is fantastic. It's just a beautiful, classic Superman-inspired score. And I also really enjoyed the character and costume design. Because this movie is so zany and wacky and comic booky, they didn't have to have the costumes be as subdued or realistic as we are used to seeing in the MCU. And I think it just made the characters even more enjoyable and really contributed to the very brightful, poppy aesthetic that this movie has. So I never had any doubts in James Gunn, but after seeing Superman, I am even more confident that he is the right man for the job to bring the DC brand out from under the shadow cast by Marvel. He's got the secret sauce as a filmmaker and a visionary and a leader. He knows the secrets to success from his days in the MCU, and he's got the appreciation for the source material. He is a fan just like us, and I cannot wait to see what is next for his DC universe. Moving on to the negatives now, and even though I really enjoyed how hard in the paint this film goes at being a true comic book movie, I do think there are a lot of people in the more casual crowd that will not be as big of fans of the tone for this movie as I was. The people that aren't really the diehards, or the people that have only really seen the MCU and really like what they do, or maybe the people that preferred the darker tone of the Snyderverse DC movies. When they see this, it might come off as too cartoonish at times for their taste. I really enjoyed it and I preferred the way they did it, but there are going to be some people where it just doesn't land with them like it did for me, and that's totally fine. You just have to know what you're wanting to get out of this movie when you're going in and adjust your expectations to that, because it is a very zany and wacky comic book movie like I already mentioned. Before this movie's release, James Gunn had made some comments about how Superman is an immigrant story and a story of what it means to be human, and that ruffled the feathers of a certain side of the internet. And I think their attempts to make Superman a culture war is ridiculous, and I agree with the sentiment that James Gunn is having for this movie, and I think it's an appropriate character to explore those themes with. I will say, however, that there were some writing moments in regards to it that I felt were a bit too on the nose and were they kind of created some awkward dialogue moments, in my opinion. I don't want to say it was heavy-handed, but I do think they could have been a little bit more subtle with it. And I think it's going to become even more annoying because once more people have seen this movie, these scenes specifically that I'm talking about are going to be all over the internet, getting ripped apart by a certain side of media, and it's just going to be an exhausting thing to see. So I wish they could have just tightened it up a little bit in that regard, but I understand he had a message that he wanted to put forth. Disregard anyone that's going to have a problem with it, and I totally empower that. But just on a filmmaking level, some of the writing in terms of this messaging was not the strongest in my eyes. The last thing I got here for the negatives is really more of a nitpick. It's just something I would have liked to have seen more of in the film, and that is just more Clark Kent. Being that this isn't an origin story, we're already 3 years into him being Superman, I believe is the time frame they gave. We don't get a lot of Clark Kent in here. There's really only 2 moments where David Cornswet is truly the Clark Kent side of the character, and even though I've never been a massive Superman fan, I always like that aspect of the superhero journey, the dichotomy of your normal life and your superhero life. I would have just liked to have seen more of that, but I understand why they didn't want to get into that too much because like I said, it's not an origin story. That's just a part of movies that I like to see. I am a fan of origin stories, but I get why they didn't want to rehash the same story we've seen a ton of times. I would have liked to have seen more Clark Kent though, but like I said, that's just a nitpick. So my conclusion for Superman is that this movie is everything that I hoped and dreamed it would be. It's everything that I needed it to be to kick off this new DC universe. James Gunn and this cast delivered everything that I wanted, and for the first time in a long time, I am excited for the future of the DC brand and its projects, not just dealing with Batman. It is so nice to be able to finally feel that feeling again as a former DC diehard fanboy. I am so happy to have them back in my good graces. If you are a superhero fan, a comic book fan, or just want to see the DC redemption, then I definitely recommend you go check this movie out. Go see it in theaters. It is worth every penny. Ignore all the outside noise. The Snyder Bros are going to try to convince you that this is the worst movie ever made, and they probably won't even see it. Ignore all the culture war bullshit. Go form your own opinion of this movie, and I think most of you will leave the theater pleased than not. When you do go see this movie, make sure to come back to this video and get down in the comment section below and tell me what you thought about it. I am very excited to see the public reaction to this movie. Make sure to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel as well for more movie reviews and content, and I will see you all in my next one. Peace.